tale as old as time, a living miracle brought to our world by forces we can't comprehend to change our lives forever, eventually meeting their demise but overcoming death and ascending. A follower of this being, given prophecies of the demise of all life in the end times. We all know this story and have come to be familiar with this story. It's no other than the story of the Bible? Now, before you call me crazy, you need to understand where this is coming from. The other day, I was driving in my car and began to think about Destiny, and that's when it struck me. Destiny 2 has a lot of story elements that share a shocking resemblance to biblical text. I mean, apocalyptic events, right versus wrong, a disgraced follower turned against his creator. It all just lined up too well to be a coincidence. So I've been doing a bit of digging into these stories, and I'm going to show you all, right now, how Destiny 2 is the Bible. As the story goes, before time existed, there was a being said to exist only because they must exist. This being would go on to create light, matter, and life, and bring them into our cosmos. The beginning, the genesis of Destiny's storyline, begins in a garden, where the gardener and the winnower played a game. This flower game would bring about the entire Destiny universe. The gardener would plant seeds of life every morning, and the winnower would reap the crop and separate the strong from the weak, what flourished from what failed. Now, when I say these words, remember that living isn't the best term for the gardener or the winnower. They didn't really live, rather simply existing because they are more principles of the universe, bodiless and inevitable. Like Sir Isaac Newton's laws of the universe state that actions will always have an equal and opposite reaction, the gardener and the winnower state that life will exist and the strongest will survive. The same applies for talking about time and a garden. They quote-unquote exist outside of time, and in a more metaphorical garden being a field of possibility. The beginning of the Bible, in essence, is the same. A primordial creator, beyond our understanding of time, bringing a universe into existence and life into it. The act of creation in this metaphorical garden, in this non-existent field of possibility before time, has set the stage for the rest of the story to unfold. Moving on from the metaphorical and into the literal, we find the Precursors, the first species to be blessed by the light. This is where we truly see the similarities. The species of the Precursors were nomadic, traveling the lands of their planet until coming upon a great orb. This orb woke up and began the golden age of the Precursors, blessing them with technological advancements and knowledge. The traveler, named the gardener by the Precursors, terraformed their world into a perfect garden. However, the Precursors felt like they lacked a purpose. The traveler stayed silent, and so the Precursors had to look elsewhere for their purpose, eventually looking to the stars and finding their answer, an astral anomaly that we now know as the Veil. This biological web of consciousness intrigued the Precursors, leading them to attempt a link between the traveler and the Veil. The traveler fled the world, leading to their perfect garden losing its perfection and being left in the dark. This part of the story seems to me to be an obvious metaphor to the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was this perfect place for Adam and Eve, the first humans, in which there was one rule: do not eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve disobeyed this rule, bringing the first sin into the world and leading their exile from the garden. The Precursors, in their quest for purpose, made the traveler abandon them and ruin their perfect lives. There are a few elements to this part in Destiny's story that are different from the Bible, but remember, this is not about Destiny's story being a one-to-one copy of the Bible, it's about Destiny's story being heavily influenced or inspired by the Bible. One of the main differences that I see is that instead of the people being kicked out of the garden like in the Bible, the Precursors were the ones that were left in the garden. Also, the Precursors didn't really know what they were doing was wrong, but their attempt at linking the traveler and the Veil was equivalent to eating the fruit. With the traveler gone from the Precursors, they came upon a decision that would end in countless catastrophes. Using the veil, they merged all of their minds into one with a restless goal, ending the universe by making it perfect in their eyes, into one final shape. The witness had been born. The traveler, their gardener, had left them behind, and they wanted to rebel against it and its ideas about life. Meanwhile, the traveler went on to bless more civilizations. However, when the witness eventually caught up with it, it fled, causing great cataclysm and disaster in the process. One example of this is the Elixni, or as we know them, the Fallen. They were one of the species blessed by the traveler. However, the Black Fleet, led by the witness, caught up eventually. The traveler fled their world, and a great disaster occurred known as the Whirlwind. The disaster left almost none standing in the end, with the only survivors being ones who boarded escape ships and fled the world. Now let's look at the Bible. As humanity progressed, so did sin. Eventually, sin on Earth had gotten so bad that the only word that could be used to describe the populations was wicked. And so, God sent a great cataclysm onto the world in the form of a flood, with rain lasting 40 days and 40 nights. The only survivors of this flood were the ones intended to survive, the ones who boarded an ark and drifted. There were more disasters like this, such as the 10 plagues unleashed upon Egypt, the Passover, but these share similarities with all the planets blessed by the traveler and eventually were struck with disaster. A prime example of this is Lubre, Rolk's homeworld. Under order of the witness, he inversed the polarity of Lubre's blue sun, causing it to crack in two and be destroyed. The traveler went from world to world with blessings and eventual ruin, just like the civilizations that disobeyed God in the Bible. Again, there are obvious differences, especially if you look at them in this narrow sense, but again, the point of this is to show you that in a broad way, these stories are similar, not identical. To save us time, I'll cut it there for the First Testament, since I'm already on page 3 of the script and I don't want a giant video, although if enough people want it, I will make a huge video on this topic. Let me know in the comments below what y'all think. But here we reach another point of importance: the arrival of the traveler in Sol. In 2014, NASA discovered an anomaly that entered the system and arrived to Mars. They sent a team of astronauts to Mars to investigate, which led to the first interaction between humanity and the traveler. This interaction sparked the golden age of humanity. Miracles occurred around the system, from Mercury being transformed into a garden world, Titan's methane oceans explored, and diseases being cured through the rapid progression of technology and science. But a dark force loomed in the distance. The Black Fleet was coming, and there was little we could do to prevent that. But instead of running like before, the traveler made a choice. To save the human species they had grown to love, the traveler used all of its power to sacrifice itself, pushing back the Black Fleet and releasing ghosts into the world. The traveler had saved humanity, but went into dormancy as a result. Now if you've been paying attention, you'll see where I'm going with this. The story of Jesus Christ begins with his birth, a historic moment that changed the course of history. Declared the Son of God, Jesus walked the earth spreading the word of God. He performed miracles to save people, such as when he cured a man of his blindness, fed thousands of people with a few fish and loaves of bread, and calmed a raging sea and walked on water with one of his disciples, and so much more. Jesus was hunted down by political and religious leaders, who called for his death, which they eventually got when Jesus was crucified and murdered. Jesus died on the cross, absolving the world of their sins if they opened their heart to Christ. After the death of Jesus, God gave power to his disciples to perform miracles to spread the word of God as well, such as Peter healing a lame man in Acts 3, raising the dead in Acts 9, as well as other disciples performing more miracles. Some prime examples include when Paul healed a crippled man in Acts 14, the exorcisms performed by Paul in Acts 16 and Philip in Acts 8, and many more. And they've got to keep hearing me out when I say this. The traveler is a representation of Jesus, with the guardians of the last city being the disciples of Jesus. I mean, both the traveler and Jesus were miracle workers around the areas they inhabited, spreading love and progress. In different ways, obviously, but the general idea is the same. Miracle workers being persecuted by evil forces yearning for control and domination. Man, this script is off the rails. I hope I'm not excommunicated for saying these things. I'm not trying to be blasphemous, I swear. But even after the death of Jesus, miracle powers were given to his disciples to keep carrying on his word. When the Black Fleet arrived in the system for the first time, led by the Witness and Nezarec, the Traveler pushed them back, absolving our system of darkness and blessing the followers of the Traveler with paracausal gifts in the form of ghosts. These Guardians would go on to help humanity rebuild and prepare for the future. Now, do you see where I'm going with this? Both of these figures had immense powers and were being relentlessly followed until the end, in which they saved their people and allowed the most devout followers to continue spreading the word and protect the people. These stories are so similar that when I first started thinking about them, I found myself confusing the two stories together at times. But where do we go from here? Jesus died and ascended to heaven, leaving his disciples on earth to continue to spread the word of God. And that's where we reach an odd point. If the Traveler is Jesus, and Jesus is no longer in the picture, then that should be the end of Destiny's story. But after thought, I've come to a conclusion. The Traveler didn't truly die in the collapse, merely going dormant. And this is why from here on, these stories aren't really identical, but more of the Bible influencing the story of Destiny instead of being strikingly similar. Jesus came back to life 3 days after his death and ascended to heaven, which is likely what inspired the Traveler going dormant instead of dying. Both lived on with their respective sacrifices, which in my opinion only strengthens the similarities. Which leads me to the last section of the video. This is the part that took me the longest time to write. The book of Revelations in the Bible is rather confusing. Revelations is a series of prophecies and visions about the end of times, given to John the Apostle. They describe the end of the world and Judgment Day, a final battle of biblical proportions, pun intended. And so after the collapse and the ghosts being released, I attribute the rest of the story to being a metaphor for Revelations. For example, the Bible describes the rise of two prominent figures in the end of times, the false prophet and the Antichrist. The false prophet, or the beast from earth, is a religious speaker, trying to move the masses away from the word of God and into eternal damnation. This figure promises power and domination and brings forth the mark of the beast, which is given to all the followers of the false prophet. This mark allows the false prophet to take control of economies and politics, and damns all who bear it. Does it sound familiar? Because it should. Let's take a look at the expansion Beyond Light. This expansion introduces Aramis, the Kell of House Salvation. Aramis promised power and domination through darkness in the form of her stasis, which is quite literally the power of control. Aramis, like the Kells before her, forced mutilation upon her ranks, with the low-ranked members of the house such as dregs having one of their sets of arms being removed. This is possibly the metaphor for the Mark of the Beast, an irreversible mark put on the ranks. The Mark of the Beast is typically placed on the forehead or hand, which symbolizes a devotion to the devil and his forces. The clipping of Elixni arms isn't a one-to-one comparison, but I see a lot of similarities. And that leads us to our next dark idol, the Antichrist. The Antichrist is a powerful beast of the sea, empowered by the devil and of immense political authority. The beast empowers his soldiers in a crusade against the forces of God. Now, who in the story of Destiny is an immense political figure of great power, empowered by the forces of darkness to lead a war against the light? That's right, Emperor Callus is the Antichrist. Now, before you say that's absurd, think about it. The Emperor of the Cabal, who reached out to the darkness and the darkness spoke back, revealing promise of power, wealth, and immortality. Callus used his political power to persuade his forces to the darkness, forcing them to devote their lives to the cause of the darkness. And here's where things get a little bit more confusing. The Antichrist is also commonly represented as one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, being conquest or pestilence. This leaves three more horsemen, being war, famine, and death. War was the second horseman to arrive to Earth when the second seal was opened, bringing the loss of peace to Earth. It may be a stretch, but I believe we can attribute the Witness to this seal. The Witness's armies were relentless in their attacks to Sol, and the fight with them isn't truly over yet, with an echo of the Witness still being out in the system. I mean, if the Witness didn't exist, there might not even be a war between light and dark, since most of the forces of darkness were compelled by the Witness in some way. When the third seal was opened, the third horseman of the apocalypse arrived, being famine. With the arrival of famine came food shortages and rationing, with the ground being devout of resources. This horseman can be attributed to the bearer of the Echo of Command, Maya Sundaresh, the conductor. Maya ripped the member of the Nine for Earth, 3, out of their dimension and into ours, effectively killing 3 Those dialogue in this expansion mandates indicate that Earth has been experiencing anomalies since the death of 3. nitrogen replacing oxygen in localized areas, infrastructure damaged by matter transmutation, and more that indicate the arrival and actions of the conductor seem to put the Earth at risk of shortages of all supplies and possibly worse. This one's a bit tricky to see clearly, but it does make sense. The death of 3 was said not to be the end of Earth, but the end of life on Earth, indicating the loss of habitability on the planet. This doesn't have to come in the form of a disaster that kills everybody, but could come from a simple lack of resources to survive driving us extinct. And this leads us to the final steel, the last horseman of the apocalypse, death. Death is said to bring death and disaster with it, followed by Hades, or the grave. This can be attributed to the deadly duo shown in Renegades, 6 of the 9 followed by his weapon, Dredge and Bale. 6's motivations of destiny are to escape the reliance on Guardians for the 9, and to do this, 6 appoints a weapon, a tool to do his bidding and wreak widespread death and destruction, in the form of Dredge and Bale and the Nightfall weapon. Dredge and Bale has one goal, given by 6, to kill all Guardians. The Nightfall weapon was given to Dredge and Bale to achieve this goal, a powerful device that, when fired, completely shuts off the light from Guardians and Ghosts alike, killing them in moments. It is also said in the Book of Revelations that Hades is the one who collects the souls, which could be shown by Dredge and Bale collecting the dead ghosts from the attacks of the Nightfall weapon. I mean, come on, collecting ghosts, collecting souls, it's too convenient of a coincidence to shake off. This is how far we are in the story of Destiny at this point. We are only 4 of the 7 seals into the Book of Revelations. Only 4 of the 7 trumpets have been blown thus far. However, we could possibly use this theory to predict what happens next in the story. For example, the 5th trumpet, when blown, leads to something that can only be described as hell on Earth. A thick black cloud enveloping the lands, tormenting all those who aren't marked by God with 5 months of constant, undying torture. But this is all speculation, and we'll have to wait and see where this all goes. To end off the video, I'd like to say a few things. This is just a theory. I'm not saying that Destiny is a religious game, nor am I truly comparing the Bible to a video game. I made this video for entertainment and theory purposes, and I'm not trying to be blasphemous. I just made this video to show the striking similarities between the story of Destiny and the story of the Bible. I'm not trying to say they're the same thing. I do believe that if this theory is correct, and the Destiny story is an allegory to the Bible, that we can use that to predict the future events of the series. But again, this video is just made in good fun. But that'll do it for the video. Leave a comment down below and tell me what you think. Also, comment what you want to see next. I'm open for anything. I stream on Twitch. It'll be linked below. Come check me out. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. As always, have a good one.